Thank you very much for joining. Anish, thank you very much for taking time out and being with us on this platform. Abhishek, similarly, thanks a lot for you. I know taking time out from a busy schedule for having a discussion. It is an honor. It is a pleasure for me as well. I think the
Thank you
topic
very
itself.
much.
Thank you. I think the topic itself is a very probably important and sort of very hot in the market today, right? I think wherever I'm going today, most of the people either talking about traffic in the either in the terms of the vehicles on the road or talking about a traffic which 5G will handle. I think that's where the common word will come in. One is a negative connotation, one is a very positive connotation. But I think lot of expectations being built when 5G was being discussed for last couple of years, and specifically around the pandemic side. If you look at the acceleration people have taken from a digital perspective and the technology perspective is huge. I think we look at almost a transformational or revolutionizing the entire aspect to it, but we still get stuck with some infrastructural issues, connectivity issues, last mile connectivity issues, the licensing issues itself from a 4G to 5G took a lot of time. But now we are standing on a platform where most of the stuff is enabled for us. Technology is available, licenses are available, rollout has happened, testing has happened. I think Reliance is the first one to do it across the ecosystem of players. Now, while this is happening, there is always an apprehension about how do we build a solid, resilient, value-driven sort of an architecture across the board. If you look at global, 5G core market will register a USD 16,000 million by FY27 at a growing at a CAGR of almost 50%. Over 60% of organizations are already sort of utilizing a 5G network there. Now, obviously it requires a perfect marriage to happen, and that perfect marriage is we think is between the power which is 5G will bring and the power the open source will bring. And I think we have both the leaders today with us, where all the difficult questions are answered by you guys, and easy one is with me. Okay, amalgamation of various industries and values is very important. So Anish, when I'm going and talking in the market, and Abhishek as well, most of the people are struggling with the use cases and the value around it. I'm sure Reliance is already into it. You'll be able to throw much better light as to how industry is shaping up as a value today.
Thank you, Sahil, for setting up this and asking a very pertinent and a very relevant question, I think, at this point in time. First of all, I would like to say that, actually, the industry has actually surpassed the tipping point when it comes to leveraging open source for enabling the digital transformation. If you see a lot of leading organizations, including us and many others, have now started adopting open source technologies. And it is very, very relevant and important when it comes to scaling it out. It is very, very important and relevant when we have to build an ecosystem. I believe that 5G is not just a technology, it's an ecosystem. Certain elements are required to be delivered at the end user level, not just at the connectivity level. So it is not remaining only at the tower or at the mobile device. So open source is extremely, extremely important. How do I ensure that I give that capability? And I think to support this on the open source, I believe cloud and edge plays a very prominent role because it's also balancing how do I balance the compute versus cost, low latency versus cost, and that's very important. So balancing the whole thing again needs to open up different domain technologies, integrating with network. And if the network is closed, there is no way I can integrate it. It needs to interface. It needs to connect. And there, I believe open source plays a very, very important.
I think there are two things which has come out from the discussion. One, are we looking at an integration at a surface level, or we are looking at integration at an engineered level? And I think the value sits when we are at an engineered level rather than at a surface level. Engineered level, it is inherent. It is part by part as a design. It's a very, but it's a big ask from the industry. Abhishek, if you can throw some insight on to how the open source and maybe a Red Hat strategy is working towards it.
So yeah, I guess we are living in a hyper-connected world, as you rightly pointed out. I think everything is available at a fingertip. Everything is connected to each other. We probably don't even know how it's getting connected, but we are so used to the user experience that we get by one click of a button. We probably don't care. But this problem at the back, what's happening at the gap back, things are becoming complex and hyper connected and requiring more and more compute as we start consuming these services. So very similar to what Anish Bhai mentioned is that rather than having it very closed source, try and make it more open, more API based, so on and so forth. Now, if you look just a few years back, right, where did this compute requirement, multifold compute requirement came in from? It's COVID, right? It's one of the biggest catalysts that we believe, which had data consumption per month, an average user going from 12 GB to 20 GB today. From a Red Hat standpoint, as we all know, we are an open source leader. The fundamental principle behind this is democratizing the technology, which will enable faster innovation. If you look at the businesses in India today, everybody is realizing the power of open source. So, right? So, our customers are pretty diverse today. We've got large banks, we've got service providers, we've got airlines who are always consuming open source technologies, from Red Hat or be it otherwise, to provide these fulfilling services to their customers. You also look at it from a government perspective, right? It's got the Indian government attention as well. So they are a very, very strong advocate and promoter of open source. If you look at the Citizen Connect initiatives, for example, Aadhaar, for example, Arogya Setu, or for that matter, even Cowin, open source played a pivotal role in this. And with the enablement available on open source, everything was falling in place. Right? So I believe what you did ask is yes, it's going to become complicated, it's going to be hyper connected. The role that open source is playing is making sure that all these hyper connected universes that we have, right, we make sure that they are seamlessly integrated so that at the front of it, any consumer doesn't realize how they are interoperating.
While having discussed with you guys, both of you, this is sure that we have identified a big problem and we know we need to solve this problem. And while I'm talking to various other forums, big and large, small, most of the people have given me this feed that we understand the world of connectivity is changing and the world, the way we will live would change. And we are ready. But then most of the people are facing a problem, which is a very pertinent problem. Two sides of the coin. One, we need to implement and solve the problem. Identifying the problem is one thing, and solving the problem is another thing, right? And Anish, I'm coming to you. See, it's what are these two sides of the coin? One is what are the principles of the blueprint? How if somebody as a leader like yourself would like to develop a 5G related business value and use cases or a revenue stream, how would they go about? What are the principles of it? While the principle is other side is executing and creating a blueprint. Now most of the people today don't have the experience to do that, neither in global perspective, neither in India perspective. So I'm now looking forward to you to guide us and tell us as to how you are thinking the principles should be. I know blueprint, asking a blueprint from you is a very big question. It will take us a full day, but at least give us some principles around it would help us.
Earlier focus was to develop technology, and I believe these are building blocks of open source. The next thing which I see, again, these are the core foundational part, is to working together for solution. You have got those common components. The problem which we are now trying to solve is to how do we work together in building something which is like an ecosystem. And there I believe again open source helps a lot because of its core fundamental point of saying let's collaborate. Let's identify how do we really optimize everything in a manner that we are able to share. If I want to build a solution, I cannot say that I have got a 5G network with the edge and I can provide a 5G low latency interface if there is nobody who can even integrate with my backend. Because finally, that capability which is there in network, if it is not unlocked at the application level, that low latency has no meaning. That slicing has no meaning. Open source and I guess Red Hat and many of those organizations are actually really helping in accelerating that.
This is a horizontal capabilities across the board, whether you're talking into one industry or you're talking sort of a social structure or you're talking economic structure. I think the resiliency will come when the ecosystem will come together, not just with one organization and so and so. So I think, Abhishek, it's a very important point, right? I mean, though we realize it's a fundamental ask from a social, economic, and an organization structure, creating such resiliency around integration, it also requires not only bandwidth capabilities of 5G and so, but it requires sort of different architectural capabilities which are well balanced and efficient enough. How do we become more efficient at the same time more architecturally driven, which is the next generation? Any light you can throw on that?
The fundamental change that I'd like to call out, right? Architectures in the erstwhile era were built to last. Now they need to be built for change. And that change would be as constant or as recurring as 6 months, right? The 5G potential is all about the enterprise side of the business, right? And while the mobility users will also be consumers, but the scale and the returns are going to come from that side. Now, while Red Hat is a true ecosystem player, right? We always believe in our ethos that we're completely neutral. We invite, collaborate with a large ecosystem of ISVs. The change in 5G, what will happen is that these ISVs will be unknown. These ISVs will be somebody who's just sitting 1 kilometer from me here and might be in his garage, right? And when these players or these newbies of software vendors are trying to develop best in class software, the right path for them to embark on this journey, I would believe, is open source. What Red Hat provides is the layer of enterprise on top of it. And that's why, if you see from a consumption standpoint, it's enterprises and governments come to Red Hat to make sure that whatever is provided for is enterprise grade. In 5G era, like Anish Bhai also mentioned, at the back of things, right? Everything has to be interoperable. As soon as you start using open source to standardize everything which runs at the front, everything which runs at the back, right? Make sure that it's open API, open architecture, everything falls in place on its own. And like I said, everything is built for change, not built for last, right? So imagine that you'll have to update and upgrade an architecture which is, an an island of different flavors running at the back, right? So this is the complexity I believe open source can solve. We are always thinking about edge. If you think about the edge, I think the best suited people, if you always ask me, is the telecom service providers. I mean, who has an edge? What is the definition of edge? 250 data centers. People like Reliance Jio, for example, right? It's not the guys that we call hyperscalers, right? Yes, they will be there. They are there to support that in a way that they can. But the edge is owned primarily for me by operators, right? But there will be a need wherein you'll have to work in a consortium with these hyperscalers. Now, would you then also look at standardizing that, right? How do you interoperate between your edge and an hyperscaler edge? Even there are opportunities to collaborate and go open source way, right? So we, as a part of our ecosystem drive, we also work with these large hyperscalers to ensure there is consistency in architecture which is built on premise, on public cloud, on say the service providers edge cloud. So that's where I'll leave at.
Got it. No, no, Abhishek, very rightly defined. The principle is collaboration an ecosystem approach, and how sort of an OEM like yourself is building and helping that ecosystem at an efficient level. Because see, in a proprietary systems and sort of closed, wall room discussions, you will always find that we will find excuses not to collaborate. But when we have an integrated open system, we will always find an excuse of collaboration, right? So the word itself changes the pivots the entire thing about it. One question is very pertaining to all of us today. When execution comes, it's a brown sort of a brownfield development. So we upgrade the existing architecture to a new architecture, or should we look at greenfield, right? We start new application, new network, new sort of integration and etc., rather than taking the old ones and upgrading it, right? Now both have the pros and cons. Very quickly and briefly, Anish, I'm coming to you and to Abhishek, both of you. What do you think are the pros and cons, and where should we needle should go?
Enterprise open source solutions actually can help boost the 5G adoption across industries like manufacturing and automotive and transportation, and not just telecom.
Yeah.
Yes, telecom will be the torch bearer or the holding point for providing the 5G connectivity and 5G solutions, but the adoption will have to happen across all these industries, and that is very, very important. But there are certain issues which we have to navigate, particularly like you said, brownfield, because most of the enterprise network, if you think, they are not yet 5G ready,
True.
and it's completely new. So obviously, their IT infrastructure either will have to integrate with 5G, and that will be a challenge. That will be a challenge. They may have to invest. In fact, the enterprise might have to invest in devices to get the 5G capability. Fortunately for Geo, we have been from day one uh, ensuring that our architecture and network architecture is fully compliant, and probably it is running with the cutting edge technologies. We are all IP from day one, so we don't have too much of legacy, or rather no legacy in terms of our network architecture. So migrating to a software defined network or network function virtualization for us is a natural transition, and we don't have to create a migration path, so to speak. There will be migration path for people. There will be some amount of change in the network. There will be some amount of investment required in that part in order to get benefit of 5G. Otherwise, everything will be only on paper. So there is a effort required. But I guess with open source, this becomes that easier, because now the moment you bring that and open up your network to adopt 5G capability, the open source can actually help you to do the collaboration, to do the integration, probably in the best possible.
There are three main pillars in this entire 5G journey of excellence and transformation, right? The first one, I believe, is the enterprises. Okay, they have to play a good role. They have to be open, receptive, ready for investments. And I'm speaking for Anish Bhai and myself here, right? They have to be ready for investments, and they have to start pushing their ecosystem. 5G presents a great opportunity for operators, right? So there are two primary architectures. As you said, I would put one brownfield, one greenfield, right? Say for Reliance Jio, for example, is fully greenfield, and there are others who are probably brownfield, right? You can still reap the benefits of open source in both these, right? I think it's easier for, say, Jio, because they're fully indigenous, they can do it. They did it for 4G, right? So it's pretty easier with very less entry barriers, I would say. But for the traditional operators who are carrying the legacy networks, they'll have to reorient. It's not going to be an easy change, right? So for them, one of the things that I read in between is, right, they'll have to transform, and every operator will have to transform from a telco to a techno, right? It's a DNA change. They have to start thinking like a developer organization, not a service provider anymore. Service provider or bandwidth is going to be incidental, in my view. You have to assume that I have it, and what can I do more, right? So it will require significant, I would say, investments on people, process, and technology, right? So we just address the technology bit. Open source can, of course, accelerate that, but the people and process is something which is left for the operators, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
lastly, I think, the third play is ecosystem. I think whenever they're entering into something, they have to go with an open mindset, choose open source and open standards, and always realize that this is going to be a consortium play. No one person can do it all. We all need to be a party, and we need to push this 5G transformation agenda towards the enterprises.
Great deal of learning for me personally, and I'm sure people who would sort of viewing this video would also take a lot of learning. Especially Anish, thank you very much for your insightful discussion about how an approach should be, and Abhishek, how OEMs are prepared to take a bigger challenge like yourself as Red Hat. Now, it's an IP which I'm trying to say. I think the movement has been like a B2B environment. Then we slowly set that B2C, and then we go to a D2C environment, right? And we're talking about these hybridly working in many organization structures. But the principle which is absolutely emerging for tomorrow is O2C environment, which is basically organizations to direct consumers environment. And everybody else will play sort of a technology integration part, and rest will be taken care of by organization. So I think that's emerging very clearly. 5G is actually a step forward, but not everything it will move forward as we, because intelligent networks and AIs and most of the automation which will play. I think if any architecture could be developed using the principle of O2C now, I dare to say it is there for success and an exponential mega success. But D2C, B2B, B2, B2C will slowly start blurring the lines and merging into an O2C environment. That's what I'll take it in the last as a summary for all of us today. Anish, thank you very much. I know taking time out from a busy schedule on a Sunday, absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. Abhishek, as usual, your view is beyond OEM. Your views are more industry relevant, and that really creates a thought leadership around across the board. So thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you, everyone. Signing off. Bye.